Montana Territory. Autumn of 1879, the wind howled low across the Bitterroot Range as Wesley Thorne rode through the dark pines, rifle across his saddle and his horse picking careful steps in the moonlight. He had planned to make camp before sundown, but a busted stirrup strap delayed him, and now the stars were out, cold and sharp overhead. He caught sight of the fire, first a flicker of orange low in the trees, tucked near a bend in the creek, too small for a hunting party, too steady for lightning. He drew the reins and dismounted, boots quiet on the pine needles. His hand hovered near his holster as he stepped closer. That was when he heard her soft crying, not loud, not wild, just the kind of broken sound that slipped out when someone thought no one was listening. He came around the last spruce and saw her, a young woman, maybe 22 or 23, knees pulled up to her chest beside a dying fire. Her dress was travel-worn and dusty, a shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders. She did not look up when he stepped into the light. Wesley cleared his throat gently. "Ma'am," her head jerked up, eyes wide and wet. She looked like she had not slept in days. I do not want trouble," she said quickly, voice rough. "I have nothing." He raised both hands, palms out. "I do not mean you harm, just saw your camp. Thought maybe you needed help." She hesitated, then nodded once, slow. Wesley stepped closer, keeping his movements calm. "Name's Wesley Thorne. I am headed north for winter trapping. You out here alone?" She hesitated again. Then, "My name is Delaney Everett." Wesley knelt by the fire and fed it a few sticks. Flames flared to life again, warm against the night. She watched him with wary eyes, but she did not flinch when he sat across from her. "You lost?" he asked gently. Delaney's eyes dropped. "No, just left behind." He waited, not pushing. After a long silence, she swallowed hard and said, "My husband died last winter. We were trying to homestead near Helena. It was rough, too rough. After he passed, his brother promised to help. He said he would take me and my sons to his ranch near Fort Benton. Said we would be safe there." Wesley leaned forward. "What happened?" Delaney's mouth trembled. "He got us halfway, then he sold the wagon team, took the money and rode off, just left us, no food, no horse." She blinked fast. "I walked 2 days with my boys, then they were taken." Wesley's jaw tightened. "Taken by a man on the trail, said he would help. I did not see he was lying until it was too late. He hit me, took them." Her voice broke. "Their names are Henry and Hope. They are only 5. She buried her face in her hands, shoulders shaking. Wesley sat still, the fire crackling between them. Then he stood. "We are going to get them back." Delaney looked up, stunned. "You do not even know me." He met her eyes, steady and sure. "You are a mother, that is enough." She stared at him, as if unsure whether to believe. He turned and walked to his horse, rummaged in the saddlebags, then returned with a blanket and a tin cup. "You warm up. I will keep watch tonight. Come morning, you tell me everything you remember about the man who took them." Delaney took the blanket with shaking fingers. "Thank you," she whispered. He gave a small nod and sat again, rifle across his knees. They did not speak much after that. But when she finally slept, curled near the fire, Wesley stayed awake, listening to the wind, watching the trees, and thinking about the way her voice cracked when she said their names. By dawn, the fire was down to embers. Wesley handed her a strip of dried meat and a tin of water. "Tell me how he looked," he said. Delaney chewed slowly, then described the man. Tall, gray beard, scar over his left eye, rode a dun mare with a crooked front leg. He called himself Marshal Dokes, but I think he lied. Wesley listened carefully, every detail sinking in. "That mare," he said. "I saw one like it in Lolo Pass 3 nights ago, camped near the ridge. I did not see kids, but I was not looking." Delaney's eyes lit with hope. "That was him, could be, I can track him." She stood, barefoot in the dirt, hands clenched. "I am coming with you." He looked at her, saw the fear and the fire both in her eyes. "It will not be easy," he said. "I am not afraid," she replied. She was, but she would go anyway. That was what mattered. Wesley nodded once. "Then let us go." They rode double on his horse, cutting across pine thickets and rocky slopes. Delaney clung to him, not speaking much. But when they stopped for rest, she asked about him, where he was from, what he did. "Grew up near Bozeman," he said. "Lost my folks in a flood when I was 16. Been trapping and guiding since." You live alone, he nodded. Mostly, got a trapline in a cabin near the river, quiet life. She was quiet a moment. I used to dream about a cabin, somewhere with a garden, chickens, a porch swing, nothing big, just safe. Wesley glanced back at her. That sounds like a fine dream. She smiled, tired but real. It was our dream, mine and my boys. His heart tugged at that, deeper than he expected. By the next nightfall, they found the trail. Tracks led down a ravine, fresh and wide. Wesley dismounted, examined the ground. Wagon, he said. 2 wheels, light load, 1 horse limping a little. Is it him? Delaney's voice trembled. Looks like it, he said. We are close. They moved fast, silence between them charged with urgency. Around dusk, they saw smoke again, this time further off, near a grove of cottonwoods. Wesley handed Delaney his rifle. Stay low, I will draw him out. She nodded, clutching the weapon tight. Wesley stepped into the clearing slow, hands up. The man, scruffy, broad-shouldered, scarred, stepped out from behind the wagon. Well, well. Lost friend, I could ask you the same. Just passing through, the man said, but his hand hovered near his belt. Wesley's eyes flicked to the wagon, 2 small heads peeking through the canvas. That was all he needed. In one smooth motion, Wesley drew his revolver and fired a warning shot into the dirt. Step away from the wagon. The man cursed and reached for his gun, but Delaney fired first. The bullet hit the ground near his boots, close enough to make him freeze. Wesley advanced on him, gun raised. You lay a finger on those kids again, and you will not walk away. The man backed down, hands raised. Delaney ran to the wagon. Henry, Hope! The children tumbled out, crying, arms thrown around their mother. Wesley tied the man up tight and left him with his own horse. Sheriff in Missoula will deal with you. They rode away before the fire burned out. That night, camped by the creek, Delaney held her children close as they slept. She looked across the fire at Wesley. You saved them, he shook his head. You did. You never gave up, she smiled, soft and full of something new. I did not do it alone. He looked at her, really looked, and something shifted. They had been strangers. Now they were something more. And the dream she had once shared with her boys of a cabin, a garden, a safe place did not feel so far off anymore. The cabin stood quiet beneath the slope of a granite bluff, its roof patched with fresh shakes and smoke curling steady from the stovepipe. Wesley led the horse toward the lean-to, guiding it slow so the children wouldn't jostle. Henry clutched the saddle horn with both hands, while Hope sat nestled between Delaney and the packs, her chin tucked against her mother's shoulder. Wesley had not spoken much on the ride east, only what needed saying where a crossing was shallow, what path to follow through the gulch, but Delaney noticed how his eyes scanned the trees without pause, how he let her rest without complaint when Hope's small body grew too heavy to carry. When the horse stopped, Henry slid down first, landing with a grunt. He looked around at the clearing, then at the cabin, and gave a single nod. It doesn't smell like horses, he said. Wesley crouched beside him. No neighbors close enough for that. Delaney stepped down with Hope in her arms, her legs stiff from the ride. The girl was asleep, fingers curled tight in her mother's shawl. Delaney brushed a loose wisp of hair from the child's cheek and looked toward Wesley. You really live here all winter? Every winter, he said. Keeps me close to the trap line. Water's clean, snow gets deep, but not so deep I can't dig out. You can stay as long as you need. She shifted Hope gently and studied the worn planks of the porch, the neat woodpile, the hand-forged hinges on the door. You built it yourself, he nodded. Took 3 summers. Hauled the floorboards in from Hamilton on a mule. She looked up then, meeting his eyes. You plan to stay, not just pass through? I did, he said. Still do. Inside, the cabin was warm from the stove and smelled faintly of spruce and iron. Wesley lit a lantern, its wick trimmed to a soft glow. Delaney laid Hope on the cot near the hearth and pulled the blanket up to her shoulders. Henry wandered to the far wall where a row of traps hung beside a narrow shelf lined with books. He picked up a volume and ran his fingers over the spine. You raid these? He asked. Some, Wesley replied. Mostly in winter. Delaney touched the edge of the table, then the windowsill where a row of dried yarrow hung from a nail. It's quiet here, she said. Wesley set a pot of water on the stove, his movements unhurried. It's meant to be, she turned toward him. Would you show me how to chop wood? He looked over his shoulder. Most folks ask for tea first. I need to feel useful, she replied, her voice low. I don't want to just wait for spring. He gave a slow nod. There's a hatchet behind the shed. I'll show you in the morning. That night, after Henry curled beside his sister in the cot, Delaney sat on the floor near the stove with her knees drawn up, watching the shadows shift across the walls. Wesley handed her a tin of tea and sat beside her, his back resting against the hearthstones. She took a cautious sip. You ever lose someone? His eyes stayed on the flames. My older brother died in the war. He used to whistle when he worked. I still hear it sometimes when I'm walking the line. She held the cup tighter. I keep thinking I'll hear Elijah's boots. That he'll walk through the trees and say I worried too much. Wesley didn't answer right away. Then he said, grief doesn't care for time, just comes when it wants, but it eases some when there's something worth tending. She looked at him, her face open in the firelight. Like a cabin, he met her eyes. Like people. Neither spoke for a while. The wind outside shifted, brushing dry needles against the eaves. At dawn, Wesley showed her how to split kindling, how to keep her feet steady and let the axe fall with the grain. She watched every move, practiced until her shoulders ached, and didn't complain once. Henry helped gather the pieces, stacking them beneath the porch with quiet diligence. By midday, Delaney stood in the dirt yard, sleeves pushed up, a streak of ash on her cheek. Teach me how to set a snare. Wesley handed her a length of wire and crouched beside a patch of rabbit sign. Loop goes here, anchor it to that root, don't leave your scent. She followed his instructions, careful and exact. He watched her work, the set of her brow, the steadiness in her hands. You learn quicker than most, he said. I have to, she replied. They walked back as snow flurried thin across the sky. Delaney glanced at the trees, then at the sloping path that led toward the distant hills. You think we'll stay here long? She asked. That's up to you, Wesley said. She stopped, turned to face him. What if I wanted to help you through winter, not as a guest, not just until spring? A silence passed between them, not cold but full. You'd be welcome, he said. She nodded once. Then she reached for his hand, not tentative, not shy, just sure. He laced his fingers with hers, and neither of them looked away. The snow came heavier the second week, wet and clinging to the branches until they drooped low over the trail. Wesley had rigged a canvas lean-to beside the shed for the firewood, and Henry took to checking the pile every morning, counting what they used and what they'd need if the storm turned meaner. Delaney had started baking with what little flour remained, stretching it with boiled acorn meal and lard until the cabin filled with the scent of something close to bread. Hope helped press the dough beside the stove, her fingers dusted white, her face serious with focus. They'd settled into something close to rhythm. Not ease grief still curled at the edges, but days had shape now, and the nights no longer felt like burdens to survive. Wesley returned one evening with a hair slung over his shoulder and a cut across his knuckle, already crusted dark. Delaney met him at the door and reached for his hand without hesitation. You catch it with your fist, she asked, examining the scrape. Snare broke loose, got tangled in the brush. She poured hot water into a basin and guided him to the bench without waiting for a reply. He let her clean the cut in silence, his eyes following the motion of her hands. You ever think about going back east? She asked, wringing out the cloth. He shook his head. Too many people, too many fences. I like a place where the wind still sounds like something wild. She smiled faintly. Elijah always talked about Missouri, said he'd take me to see the steamboats when the kids were older. I never told him I didn't want to go. Wesley watched her for a moment. Why didn't you? I didn't want to make him feel small. He needed the dream more than I needed the truth. He turned his hand over in hers, palm rough against her skin. And now, she looked up. Now I want something I can hold in both hands. They didn't speak after that, but the silence was full, not hollow. That night, after the children were asleep, Delaney opened the small trunk she'd carried from the wagon. She lifted out a folded piece of muslin, unwrapping it until a worn scrap of paper appeared creased, damp at the corners but still legible. She set it on the table in front of Wesley. It's the land claim. Elijah filed it before he passed. 30 acres near the Bitterroot River. He never told me how to find it, but I think I could if I saw the ridge again. Wesley bent over it, tracing the lines. That's good land, sheltered. Plenty of water. I don't want it for memory's sake, she said. I want to make something new. He didn't answer right away. Then he looked at her, his voice low. You think you'd want help building it? Her eyes searched his face. Not just help. I want someone who'll stay when the hard parts come. Wesley stood and crossed the room, then took her hand and pressed it against his chest, where his heartbeat moved steady beneath flannel and skin. I've stayed through blizzards, through springs that came too late, he said. But I've never stayed for someone. Delaney leaned into him, her voice barely above a whisper. Then stay for us. He rested his forehead against hers, the warmth between them quiet and sure. Outside, the wind shifted again and snow began to fall softer, like a promise waiting to be kept. Delaney stood with her sleeves rolled and hands sunk wrist deep in the cold red clay of the riverbed. Wesley had shown her where the bend curved wide enough to catch the sun, where the silt ran clean after a thaw. She worked in silence, shaping the trench for the seedbed, her skirt hemmed dark with muck. Henry hauled stones from the upstream bank, stacking them in a patient line, while Hope sat nearby weaving grass into uneven braids. Wesley watched from the higher slope, one boot braced against a stump, his axe resting across his shoulder. He'd cleared a stand of pine that morning, hauling the logs to dry before they'd be notched. The new cabin wouldn't rise fast, but it would rise true. Delaney straightened, wiped her hands on the sides of her skirt. This ground's softer than I figured. Wesley stepped down the incline, his stride easy despite the weight of the tool. Rains last week helped. Roots'll take better if you plant before the next frost sets in. She nodded, then glanced at the horizon. I keep waking before daylight, thinking I'll hear wagon wheels again. I know it's foolish, but my body remembers the sound. It isn't foolish. He set the axe down and crouched beside her. There's things I still listen for, things that never come. She looked at him, and her voice dropped to a hush. Do you ever wonder if you've earned peace, or if it just finds you when it's tired of passing you by? Wesley pulled a stone from the trench and tossed it aside. I think peace is a thing you build, not alone and not all at once, but with steady hands. Delaney answered that with silence, not empty but thoughtful. She glanced toward the rise where the first timbers for the new home lay stacked and squared. When I told Elijah I wanted land, I didn't picture this. I pictured fences, neighbors, rows of corn, but this is yours, Wesley finished, and it can be whatever you make it. Hope rose from her place in the grass, toddling toward them with a crooked braid in one hand. Mama, this one's for the window. Delaney took it with a smile, tucking it behind her ear. Perfect, she said. Then, to Wesley, she used to cry every night. Now she hums in her sleep. Means she's not waiting for the next storm. Delaney's eyes lingered on his a moment longer than before, then she turned back to the bed and began patting the earth flat with her palms. We'll need a second row if we want enough to store. Wesley crouched beside her and placed his hand over hers. Then we'll plant another. That evening, the sky turned pale gold behind the ridge, and Wesley lit the lantern early, shadows stretching long across the cabin floor. Delaney stood at the hearth, stirring a kettle of soup made from dried venison and the last of the wild onions. Henry sat cross-legged near the door, carving a sliver of wood into the shape of a bird, his knife strokes slow and careful. Wesley leaned against the frame, arms crossed, watching them in the quiet. When Delaney turned with a ladle in hand, she caught his gaze and held it. You've been different since we started cutting the new frame, she said. He stepped inside, brushing sawdust from his shirt. How so? Lighter, she said. Like your shoulders don't lean into the wind the same way. He took the bowl she offered, nodding thanks. I've always worked for myself, never meant much beyond the next season. This time, it's not just mine. Delaney sat down across from him, hope curled against her side, already half asleep. When I was little, I used to think love was about grand things, big gestures, sweeping words. Wesley met her eyes. And now I think it's about who keeps showing up at the end of the day. Outside, a coyote called from somewhere beyond the trees. Henry set down his carving and pulled the blanket over his knees. That one sounds close. Wesley stood and latched the door. They'll keep their distance. They always do when the fire's strong. Delaney watched him as he returned to the table, the way he moved without noise, without waste. She reached for his hand beneath the edge of the table, fingers curling around his with quiet certainty. He didn't speak, didn't need to. The heat from her palm, the steadiness of her grip, those things said enough. Later, after the children were settled, they stood outside beneath a sky thick with stars. The air smelled of wood smoke and pine sap, and Wesley's breath clouded faint in the cold. Delaney leaned into him, her shoulder against his. "When spring comes, we'll mark out the fence line." He turned his head slightly, lips near her temple. "We'll plant plum trees at the corners, give the bees something sweet to work on." She looked up at him then, her voice soft. "You sure you don't mind the noise? Chickens, children, me, talking too much when I'm nervous." He smiled, slow and true. "I've known silence long enough. I'd rather live where the mornings are full." Delaney touched his chest, fingers resting over his heartbeat. "Then let's live full." He bent his head, brushing his mouth against hers, not sudden, not fierce, just certain. Like a promise already kept. When they finally went inside, the fire had burned low, but the room was warm. Wesley pulled the quilt from the cot and spread it over the bed frame they'd begun to share, and Delaney moved beside him, steady and sure. Outside, the new snow glistened faintly under the moon, and the cabin stood firm in the hollow, no longer a place of waiting but of belonging. The first frost hardened the soil enough that Wesley had to warm the axe blade before splitting fence posts. He worked in layered silence, the kind of quiet that came with purpose, not loneliness. Each strike echoed across the flat, a rhythm the children had begun to follow from the porch, counting each swing like a game. Delaney stood behind the cabin, mending the seams of Henry's coat with tight, even stitches, her breath visible in the morning chill. When she finished, she brought the coat to Wesley, who had just set down his maul. He looked up, sweat damp on his collar despite the cold. "You'll run through this pile by the end of the week," she said, handing him the coat. "Henry says he'll help tomorrow if you'll let him." "He's strong enough now," Wesley replied, brushing a splinter from his palm. "I'll show him how to brace the post with a heel. Keep the line straight." Delaney rubbed her hands together. "He'll take to it better if he sees the fence as something that keeps things in, not out." Wesley glanced toward the far edge of the field where the markers curved toward the riverbank. "It's both. Keeps rabbits out of the root bed and the children close when the weather turns." She nodded, then hesitated. "There's something I want to ask you." Wesley set them all aside, his gaze steady. "Go on, when the cabin's finished and the beds are planted." "Would you marry me?" He blinked once, the question settling into the space between them like a stone in a still stream. "I know I'm not supposed to ask," she added, voice even, "but I've done enough waiting in my life. I want to build something without guessing where it's headed." Wesley stepped forward, his jaw working as though words came slower than usual. "I'd been waiting to ask you," he said, voice rougher than usual. "But you've always been quicker on your feet." She smiled, and his hands found hers, calloused and chapped, but warm. "I don't need a preacher," she said. "Just your word." "You have it," Wesley said. "You always had it." They married with the children standing close, Henry holding a cedar bough and Hope clutching a length of dried wildflowers. Delaney wore a blue shawl Wesley had bartered from a Blackfeet trader the previous spring, and Wesley had trimmed his beard with the same knife he used to dress hides. They spoke their promises in front of the hearth, with the sun sliding low through the window and the smell of rabbit stew thick in the air. No crowd, no ceremony, just vows made plain and true and kept. That night, after the children had gone to sleep, Wesley pulled a small box from beneath the floorboard. He hadn't meant to keep it hidden so long, but timing had a way of shifting in the quiet parts of life. He handed it to her without a word. Inside lay a carved ring shaped from antler, smooth and light but strong. Delaney turned it over in her palm. "You made this," he nodded. "Took me 3 winters to get it right." She slid it on her finger, then leaned into his chest, where the fire's glow flickered across the walls and the room held nothing but warmth. the seasons turned. By mid-April, the fence was finished, the rows planted, and the new cabin stood tall with a porch wide enough for sitting and watching the children chase each other across the grass. Henry built a bird feeder from scrap wood, and Hope named every chicken after wildflowers. Delaney's belly rounded by summer's end. She moved slower, but her hands never stopped kneading dough, hanging linens, guiding Hope through her letters. Wesley worked the fields with a steadiness that matched her pace, a rhythm learned together, day by day, without hurry. When the baby came, it was early evening, the air full of the scent of pine and dust. Wesley caught the child himself, with Delaney gripping his wrist and whispering through clenched teeth that he'd better not drop her. Hope and Henry waited outside with the mule, nervous and wide-eyed, until Wesley stepped out and said, "You've got a sister." They named her June. After the month the seeds took root. Years passed, but the shape of life did not change much, only deepened. Wesley taught Henry to trap and carve, and when the boy was old enough, he built a smokehouse beside the creek. Hope learned to dye cloth with plants and made her own dresses by the time she was 11. June followed them both, sticky with jam and always asking questions. Delaney kept the garden, the house, and the rhythm of the seasons. When the nights grew long, she read aloud by lantern light, her voice low and calm, Wesley's hand resting on her knee. Neighbors came in time, families settling the nearby ridge. A schoolhouse built downstream, but they never lost the quiet that had carried them through. It lived in the way Wesley brushed snow from her shoulders after she came in from the coop, in the way Delaney packed his lunch pail each morning without fail, in the way their children grew sturdy and kind. They did not live without sorrow. It came, as it always does. But it never stayed long, not with the fire always lit and the porch always full. And every night, as the stars blinked awake, Wesley reached for her hand beneath the quilt, and she met him halfway, no longer waiting for anything, not anymore.